I've played tons of Super Nintendo games, and throughout time, I found plenty of good games and plenty of bad games, but today, I'm going to talk about 10 Super Nintendo games that you should play, ones that really brought me joy and stood out from the rest. Now bear in mind, some of these will be well known, and while I'm not overly fond of pushing out common titles for suggestions, I do still believe that it aligns with what I do every day. If I have 10 games that fit the bill for one of these episodes, I'll make one. And this was the community voted episode, so even better. Now bear in mind, these aren't the best games on the Super Nintendo, but they're pretty damn close. Some might feel they are. Let's begin. We're going to start this list off with a game that surprised me. I didn't grow up with a Super Nintendo. In fact, it was my neighbor and my cousin that had the Super Nintendo. I didn't own a console of my own until the 5th generation with a Nintendo 64. To fit the gap for that, my dad downloaded a little program called SNES and gave me a zip file chock to the brim of all of these games that I had never heard of, and I started from zero and worked my way down. One of the first games I encountered was ActRaiser. ActRaiser is a blend of city building simulation and platforming elements. In fact, a vast majority of the game is you spending your time going up against the forces of Tanzra, as your score directly impacts the population count for your cities. As we rebuild civilization, we'll need to share knowledge between those towns as sort of a plot point, and it all culminates to an epic boss rush before fighting the big bad evil guy, Tanzra. The game is absolutely wonderful and is quite affordable for what it is. It did have a sequel, but we don't talk about it. It's trash. It also had a remaster. We don't talk about that either. There are tons of games in the Jurassic Park franchise, and more often than not, they're just ports of the same game, over and over again. That's just how it went. Jurassic Park kickstarted an interest in dinosaurs for me, and I like to think an entire generation, and it seems to constantly do it right, so more power to them. Them being Ocean of America, which is shocking because historically Ocean created things akin to what LJN was capable of. What I'm trying to say is that they're fucking bellends. But Jurassic Park on the Super Nintendo is a solid game. A majority of it is you running around doing oddly specific tasks in oddly specific areas, trying to find all these dinosaur eggs and then eventually filling the rest of the requirements as they pop up. We also have these first-person scenes, which I found to be really cool. It's not often that those were pulled off well on the Super Nintendo. The one chief complaint I have about the game is that there isn't a password system or a progress save system at all, so we have to beat it in one sitting, which if you live alone is fine, but I have 5 tyrants that at any time could mess that up. So emulation and save states, probably your best bet. In my opinion, this is hands down one of the greatest games on the Super Nintendo, and I'll die on that hill, because it is. This game is basically Shinobi, Mega Man X, and Ghouls and Ghosts combined in a one perfect cyberpunk ninja platforming game. The way Hagane moves is incredibly fluid on a level that I've yet to see in any other Super Nintendo game, especially a platformer. We can use a variety of weapons. Hagane can somersault and damn near one-shot the bosses. He can grab walls, he can jump off walls, he can do so much. And when people ask me about challenging games on the Super Nintendo, I always bring this one up because it is a solid game, period dot. Story-wise, we learn of the Fuma and Koma ninja clans, who have learned how to combine black magic and ninjutsu. Between the two, they're both mad lads who are capable of unheard of destruction and power. The Koma clan attacks the Fuma clan and basically stole what they consider the Holy Grail, but one member of the Fuma clan survived, Hagane, at least his brain did. What I'm trying to say is that Hagane is Ninja RoboCop and this pleases me. This is one that you need to play though, trust me. I'm all for therapeutic experiences. In fact, I love city building games. It's so easy to get lost in the plot of all of these games that have come out through the years, but when you manage to snag a game that is relaxing and minimalistic, that's something that tends to catch my attention. SimCity is an easy, laid-back game where our only objective is to build a city. We need to listen to the requests of the population. Sometimes they want more residential areas, sometimes they want more business areas, and of course we need industrial areas to balance the economy. Because we have all of those areas, they need power, and power stations produce pollution. We also need to make efficient roads and mitigate traffic. Or if you're me, you'll nuke all the hospitals because they actually don't do anything for the population. Neither do schools, if I remember. I made it really close to 1 million population, but there's so many variables to get into it that I couldn't get it. Oh well, maybe I'll try again one day. This is one of the most genius collections that Nintendo has ever pushed out. For anyone who doesn't know, this is a 16-bit remaster of the 8-bit Mario games. I'm talking Super Mario Bros. 1 through 3 and the Lost Levels as well. What are those? Well, that's the Japanese version of Super Mario 2 that we never received in America. Instead, we received a reskin of Yume Kojo Doki Doki Panic, which was made for a televised event in Japan, so it didn't make sense to keep the same characters. So they reskinned it. But honestly, the allure of this collection is that it does look really damn good, and if you want to get the ultimate collection, you can always nab Super Mario All-Stars plus Super Mario World as well. You'd have tons of fun on one little gray cart. For anyone who's starting to collect true hardware or build a library, this is the one to get. It's 4 games in one, and they aren't bad. To date, this is my favorite JRPG. For a long time I didn't play JRPGs, and I say that often, and it's true. I actually avoided them forever. But when I was stationed in Kunsan Air Base, South Korea, I elected to use my iPhone to my advantage and begin checking out the Final Fantasy line of games. I beat Final Fantasy 1 through 3 on my iPhone, obviously a long time before I started streaming. So when it came time to stream it, I actually picked up with Final Fantasy 4, 5, and 6, with 6 being an incredible experience from start to finish. The game was made with a dream team of powerhouse Square folks, the ingenuity of Hironobu Sakaguchi, the art prowess of Tetsuya Takahashi and Kazuka Shibuya, and the magnum opus performance of Nobuo Uematsu. It's difficult to find words to describe just how captivated I was playing this. Each character has their own fleshed out story that works, it doesn't overstay its welcome, we can use any character we want because in the end, they'll all take part in the final battle. The opera scene makes me cry like a bitch every time, and the final movements of the game, cherry on top. You would be hard pressed to find a better JRPG from the 4th generation of gaming, and honestly I've yet to find one from any generation that's as good as Final Fantasy 3. This game isn't that special, but it is fun, at least for the kiddos, and it's much more than just painting. It's got a few elements that do stand out, like a music composer, a point-and-click minigame, an animator, a raster graphics editor. There's a lot going on. Plus, we could use the Super NES mouse, which as a peripheral I didn't have at the time, so I wanted to emulate it. By the way, back then, the Super Nintendo mouse was packaged with Mario Paint, and it came with a Nintendo-sponsored mousepad. I should really get one. I think it would be cool to use it. It's one of the many creative games that Nintendo has released throughout the year, and it did have a sequel, believe it or not. It was just on the failed Nintendo Disk Drive peripheral, which is a shame. I think it would have been cool to check out. When a console releases for the first time, the first 30 games aren't known to be exceptionally great, right? Nobody has had the time to learn how to properly develop games on the new medium, so they can be hit or miss. Not the case for Konami. They straight up broke barriers to put Super Castlevania 4 on the Super Nintendo, and this game is another one that is on my list of favorite Super Nintendo games because Simon is capable of so much more than he was on the NES. I'm talking we have whip dexterity! The ability to use that whip in more directions than were possible before, and let's not forget that the whip is used to link to rings and we can swing across. That blew my mind, which is kind of hard to do when you think you've seen everything a system is capable of doing. The director of the game also wanted this to be a reimagining of the original Castlevania, and I think in some ways Masahiro Ueno did a solid job. Oh, by the way, that box art? It was done by Tom Dubois, which makes me wonder if he did the box arts for other Konami games. That information is usually pretty hard to find. If you've watched my previous episodes, you'll know I am not a fan of Adventure Island, at least not on the NES, because we play as a guy who slathers an unfathomable amount of Crisco on his feet to the point where he's reached a zero friction coefficient, so even on solid Earth, he slips around like he's on marble. Fuck that guy. But I did play them in order, and after Adventure Island 1 and 2 came Super Adventure Island on the Super Nintendo, and in comparison to the other entries, this was actually pretty good. The music itself was also done by Yuzo Koshiro. I actually put it in the top 10 Super Nintendo Soundtracks episode, which I'll link below. By the way, if you want to see more of those soundtrack episodes, make sure to ask. I do have it in rotation, but I always put precedence on what you want to see, which is something I feel most YouTubers don't really care about, but I do. But back to the game, Master Crisco Feet is the local hero. He saved the jungle twice now, and everybody loves him. Even the hot lady of the forest, right? Miss Jungle, the hot spicy lady of the jungle loves. And he's spending some time with her, and he notices something hard. And no, it's not his wee-wee, it's Tina! She's been turned into stone by Dark Cloak. So naturally, we need to find him and revert the spell. Honestly, it's a solid game. Wrapping up our list today is one that you should all know because in my opinion, it's an enhancement to a game that was fine-tuned and set the baseline for the tournament fighting genre that we all know and love, Street Fighter 2. Sure, the original Street Fighter 2 was awesome, but wouldn't it be cooler if we could play as the bosses? In Street Fighter 2 Turbo, we could. Also, because it was the Turbo version, we could play at a faster pace, which if you've ever messed with the baseline version of Street Fighter 2, it truly is a slower game. It's almost day and night, and the improvements of Street Fighter 2 Turbo are really cool. The graphics look slightly better, we have some color variations, and some of the characters even got special moves. Well, except for Guile. Nobody likes Guile. I will say I love Guile's stage though, because ironically the fighter jet on Guile's stage is what I worked on for 11 years. The F-16. Personal stories aside, this game also includes Champion Edition rules, which do offer a little bit more bang for your buck, but honestly, I would just rather play Turbo. It makes more sense. The only way this game could get better would be if I owned Super Street Fighter 2, which I do regard as the ultimate version of Street Fighter 2 on the Super Nintendo. And that's it for today's list. What did you think of it? Did any of these games bring you joy in your childhood? If so, I'd love to hear about it below, and I know the community would as well. Speaking of our community, if you made it to the end of this video, you're already home in our community. We're a group of folks who enjoy remembering a time when life was a little bit easier to live, and we'd love to have you here. Finally, the single most important thing you could do for me is to hit that thumbs up button, as it directly impacts the visibility of the videos and the projects that I work on every single day. As always, from my family to your family, good energy, good vibes, Fortefyre out.